It's the Newport This Week video podcast series. I'm Bill Bartholomew. Thanks always for taking some time to check out what's happening in your community. What we're going to talk about today is an issue actually it's a global issue, national issue, a statewide issue, and it's acutely impacting the Aquidneck Island community on a lot of different levels. And there's some action being taken by legislators in our community. So before we begin our conversation with our guest today, Sam Chozick is a reporter for Newport This Week and has been covering today's topic thoroughly for the newspaper. Sam, could you kind of set the table for us when it comes to flavored vapes and where that issue stands right now?
Yeah, thank you, Bill, and thank you, Melanie, for joining us. What I spent the better part of last week kind of researching, learning about, and developing the article for was a proposed amendment brought forward by Lou DePalma. So it's what it's going to do is take the ban on flavored vapes and create an exemption for stores dedicated to the sale of vapes or electronic nicotine delivery systems, stores that are dedicated to selling vapes, cigarettes, tobacco related products. And 10% of the sales revenue that the state generates from the sale of electronic nicotine delivery systems will go towards tobacco cessation programs, whether that be education, counseling, and other forms of rehabilitation.
Yeah, and what's so important here is this refers to a change in policy, and these are regulations that are typically done on a statewide basis. So, under the Raimondo administration, a flavored vape ban took place. There was some pushback. I remember covering at the time rallies at the State House where groups of people were complaining that this was an infringement on their rights and made some reasonable commerce-related arguments as well at the time. Nonetheless, it went through, and Rhode Island now different than, let's say, New Hampshire in policy. That sets the table for this proposed reversal. Senator DePalma included in those who are introducing this. Melanie Saunders joins us here and is prominently featured in this article that Sam wrote so well. Melanie, I guess before we just kind of, rather than getting into title, tell us what you do work-wise on a daily basis with your advocacy from a prevention standpoint.
Yeah, so thanks for having me today. I am the coordinator for Newport Prevention Coalition, and essentially what we do is we offer resources and prevention education and harm reduction strategies to the Newport community. And we do this through partnerships with local organizations, through advocacy, and just try to create these sort of protective factors, or what we call them. So that's essentially what I do in a nutshell. And a big piece of what that is making folks aware about what's going on from a legislation standpoint. So something like this flavored vape, these bills being introduced are really important to the work that we do. So.
Your reaction to the introduction of these bills is?
So my initial reaction is that these bills pretty much it's very clear that they're all about creating revenue, a stream of revenue within the state of Rhode Island. They have been heard on the Senate Finance Committee floor and are being held right now for study. And it is very likely that these bills, the language within the bills, are going to be directly put into the budget that is going to be voted on in June. So at this point, there is not going to be votes on the individual bills. It's looking like, but instead, like Sam had mentioned in the article, there's going to be the creation of this loophole for vape shops to essentially be the only location that you would be able to purchase a flavored vape in legally in the state of Rhode Island. So right now, you cannot purchase any flavored vapes, with the exception, I believe, of menthol, uh, legally within the state of Rhode Island.
Right, that is the current practice. It's menthol is the only flavor that you're allowed to purchase. And what that means, there's a scale, there's a spectrum as well. But I want to circle back to Sam in just a moment because I want to ask a follow-up question in terms of your coverage of the story and touch on something you said right there, Melanie, which I think is just fundamental to this discussion. Are we having a conversation about people's ability or rights to have access to whichever product they may like if they're of age or anything of that sort? Or are we having a conversation based on the fact that this came through the Senate Finance Committee on a revenue situation? Is this more about money than protecting the community, in your opinion, Melanie?
Well, in my opinion, we can be having all those conversations at the same time because often what happens is that by creating these systems, often using taxation language, the burdens are being put on the backs of people of lower incomes and young people as well, who are the most susceptible to addiction. So it's important to kind of talk about those things at the same time. It is looking like the governor, in when he introduced the budget back in January, he did recommend a tax hike on all tobacco products to over $5, which is um, a pretty high tax rate, compared to other states. Rhode Island has one of the highest, and this would just really spike it. And you kind of have to make sure you have a very nuanced conversation about when you increase taxes on tobacco products because of who that affects mostly. So yes, it does work in the sense that many folks will not be able to afford purchasing tobacco products, whether those are cigarettes, whether they're cigars, whether they're, ends, which are vapes. Um, but yeah, it's just important to kind of see the whole picture.
Yeah. I'm reminded of cannabis regulation, which began as a Wild West type of process in Rhode Island, where there was no standardized testing practices whatsoever. Never, it was basically on the owner of a dispensaries. It was their role, I guess, to make sure. And I say I guess because that's how unclear the language was, which leads us to a potential expansion of the availability of vapor products, vaporizer products here in Rhode Island. What type of regulatory environment needs to be in concert with any type of legislation that comes forward here, in your opinion, Melanie? And then to that end, Sam, I want to follow up and anything that you've heard in terms of speaking with people on the ground about how does this thing move forward? Because you can't just put these back on the market untested, even if you have specialized stores. Are these going to be regulated like cannabis, or is this going to be more like, buying a eggs or milk or something where the specialization is not that detailed or regulated?
Yeah, the regulation is a really complicated issue, right? Because you're seeing all of these, what they call kind of black market vapes, becoming available online, and that's predominantly where folks tend to be getting those products. But the FDA has been pretty hesitant about adding any kind of flavored vape to the approved list of nicotine replacement treatment. And at the moment, they're trying to push forward vape flavors that are like, coffee and mint and things that might not appeal necessarily to young people. They have stopped approving those with flavors like berry or like those really sweet ones. But the in terms of, the safety of these products, um, there is really no safe way to consume nicotine. The way that the products are being made right now is a very similar to what you were mentioning about cannabis, very concentrated, extracted form of the original tobacco leaf as it was grown as a plant. And then also, it's important to note that the only FDA approved nicotine replacement treatment are the patches, gum, and I believe lozenges. So to go on the record, I just want to go on the record to say that flavored vapes are not a safe way to consume nicotine. In fact, there is evidence that it might be more unsafe than something like cigarettes in many ways.
Yeah. There's a lot of evidence, no doubt, that is going to also come to fruition in the future when we actually understand the impact of a lifetime of consumption. That's why you're seeing some nations outside of the US that have effectively this week the news, anybody who is basically 8 years old or younger will never be able to buy a vape or cigarettes. In, I believe it's Australia that was enacted in, those protections in concert with social media protections. Some people, though, would say it's overreach. Some people would say these products are part of a free market system that we live in, and that this is a cash grab at the end of the day. Sam, in terms of that and your reporting, what are you hearing in terms of that back and forth of how much of this is about money, how much of this is about safety? how much of this is about regulation and thinking about youth in the context of reintroducing these products to the market?
Yeah, well, in terms of regulation, from the standpoint of not allowing younger people to get their hands on these, of course, in theory, if you're not 21, you're not going to be able to go and buy it. And from people that I talk to, someone who owns a shop here on Broadway, when they decided to really enforce the law, they did a really good job at it. But from 2019, after the executive order, until 2025, it was kind of, like you said, with the cannabis, kind of Wild West, where people were finding a way to get their hands on these. And younger kids, I mean, they get their hands on alcohol, and you're not supposed to. And so, again, what I've heard is when they really did decide to enforce it, they did a good job. And people that did distribute flavored vapes when they weren't supposed to, they paid a price for it. And in theory, that works, and that's great. But there's just more of them on the market in the state, and currently there's not. So now there's appeal, and there is kids that have an older brother or a cousin or someone that they can use to get their hands on these products that they're not supposed to. And in terms of the safety, you said the FDA is unsure because there's no possibility of long-term research, because people have only been consuming them for a decade, a little more. So it's not out there. It doesn't exist. And the short-term outlook is also not so favorable, especially if you're not a cigarette smoker. I mean, it's supposed to be a cessation method. And by that standpoint, it's safer than cigarettes. Maybe if you smoke a pack a day, you can get down. But if you don't smoke at all, it's just another way to damage your health.
Mm-hmm. Melanie, last thoughts here. If you had Senator Palmer in front of you right now and you could have you had a 20-second pitch, what would your appeal be to the senator? And we will make sure that the senator sees this.
I would say that, just as I said earlier, often these kinds of systematic changes are really put on the backs of those who are experiencing and susceptible to addiction the most, which tend to be lower income folks and kids. And from the time that the vape ban was established, the flavored vape ban was established, to now, you can see a significant decrease in the amount of flavored vape usage within the state of Rhode Island. We have that data, and it was working. And this would completely undo years of other coalition work that made this happen.
And it seems like it's a moment where, as our federal government in some parts insists that nicotine ought to be viewed in the context of a sort of bro culture, get more stuff done in capitalism type of mindset, maybe not pushing as a health food, but sort of a machine creation substance, and with some credibility, also telling you that Tylenol causes autism. The trust in science is at an all-time low, and the destruction of it at an all-time high. So why are we doing that on a statewide basis for a couple of bucks? It's a crazy situation. Sam Chozick, Newport This Week, Melanie Saunders, thanks for your time today. This is the Newport This Week video podcast series. We take you inside the stories that impacted Quinnipiac Island. You'll find them at newportthisweek.com, and make sure you subscribe to the Newport This Week YouTube channel. I'm Bill Bartholomew.